Well, hello there, friends. Good morning. Um, it is a cold, cold morning here in Brooklyn. Well, hello there, friends. Good morning. Let's get this on the other side. So, yeah, it was super, super cold last night. Tara and I were out. We went and saw there's a symphony up on the Upper West Side. We went and saw it. It was really, really great. This guy did he did these kind of like a show choir like you would do in like high school, but you just don't really see that in the city here. And mostly it's chamber choirs, and they're very stuffy, and they're tie. And I'm making fun of myself. Essentially, we're getting ready to sing Handel a couple Sundays from now. So there's a really, really stuffy kind of chamber choir scene here. But these guys last night, man, they kind of blew off the house. Very, very diverse group. There's a blind woman soprano that was singing. There were a lot of gospel singers, a lot of people from other nations and stuff. Just kind of this island of misfit toys they pulled together. That was really, really great. So that was kind of what we were up to last night. In the cold Brooklyn winter here, and we're not even to February yet, so kind of waiting in anticipation of the cold and the wet and the wind. So what we're doing here is we're going to be live streaming a short story commission. Now, Spark and Echo, they have a Patreon. They have a whole kind of thing they've built up between people sparking art about verses and in the text, and people being commissioned to make art about these specific texts. And so I did a short story with them. Some of you know I did a short story with them early this last year, and I told them, hey, I'm working on a novel that is currently out at Agents, and about 2 novels later, there's a kind of connection there. And I was curious if I could, skip ahead, work on that novel, but do it in sort of an anecdotal framework, so that the stories would be connected, but it would work for their artist in residency. And they really liked that idea. So in the process, I figured, hey, I'm already getting paid for these stories. Why not live stream kind of my process? I know there's some of you are writers, some of you are creators, and I think that might help. It's kind of vulnerable for me to consider that. But I think since I'm getting paid anyway, that there's not really a risk inherent in showing, all of the warts, all of the flaws, and processing through it. So I'm hoping, over time, as we do this, it will become very, very helpful to you who are in the midst of that process, and also interesting to those of you who are really, 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 really into kind of why I'm writing what I'm writing and those sorts of things. So what we're going to do is I'm going to switch over to kind of a share screen, and I'm going to talk mostly today about pre-writing and about how I'm prepping for this project. Because I just talked to a writer this week up at Grand Central Station. Most of what I do is during my day job, I guess you'd say, is encouraging creators, encouraging artists, and giving them kind of the support they need to be able to move to the next step of making what they really want to make for the reasons they want to make them, which are both really important. There are a lot of artists in the city who make what they want to make, but not for the reasons they want. So it's kind of twisted. And then there are other people that don't get to make what they make. They just, do whatever they have to do to get by. And so we try to put people and resources in place to help move people forward. So for him, I think it would be helpful to see kind of that process, but also for other people as well that we've interacted with. So without further ado, this is Video 1 Short Story Commission 01 for Spark and Echo. We are going to talk about how to prepare short story. Let's see if I can get the screen share working. So I'm opening up, what I'm getting ready to open up here is Scrivener. And this is a program that, let me show you like a blank here. Let's see. This is a program that allows you basically to make passive outlines. So you see like there's a blank text, fiction text, novel parts, short story, nonfiction texts. There's the Chicago style essay, research proposal. Those of you who are doing like long form, theses, PhD theses. I just listened to one, a friend of mine, Jordan Wood up at Boston College, had a phenomenal thesis on Maximus. It kind of helps you form organic outlines for long form stuff like that. Script writing, of course, radio scene style, BBC tape drama, comic script, documentary scripts, screenplays, stage plays. I just sent a stage play to the Fellowship for Performing Arts for their consideration. They're getting ready to do A Man for All Seasons, just off Broadway on I think it's 50th Street. So this is the program I use for that. The documentary script. This is the format I'm using for for some of the Alaska research in the Alaska project. So it creates kind of these passive outlines for you. Poetry and lyrics, obviously, I've used that before. That's a program I used when I was prepping for the New York Poetry Festival when we read out there. So I transferred my poems into there to have kind of a nice, clean format. The first year, the second year, I was reading directly from the manuscript that I used there, and then there's persuasive lecture and a recipe collection. I didn't know there was a formal format for recipe collections, but there you go. Actually, just the other day, there was someone on Twitter. There's an agent I was interacting with. Her name is Susan Velasquez of Jabberwocky, and she just scrolled her on Twitter before I interacted with her on email. And she had posted that these people were frustrated with recipes because of how this trend in mom bloggers of rambling through a massive story in order to get to a very practical how to. So hopefully I don't do that. But so anyway, it creates passive outlines. So like if you choose one here, I'm just going to do this because it, short example. So I'll just pull this up for just a second so that you can kind of see how it works. So you kind of have chapters, scenes, and I'm not going to turn this into a massive Scrivener tutorial. There are people who are much more knowledgeable than I in it. You have chapter, scene, characters, places, front matter, like the format, paperback novel, all that stuff, ebook. And that's Anton, apparently is pretty arrogant. You develop a scene, type here, and each of these are creating scene, scene one, scene two. They're creating separate RTF documents that you end up later compiling into a full document. And so by dragging them, above each other, you can actually reorder the whole document in a moment. You can nest them, you can pull them above each other. You can pull back into a higher layer to actually see your note cards. This is where Johnny falls into the well. This is where, our Lassie rescues Johnny. So even on a meta level, if you get really in the thick of it and you've got, words and words and words and words and words all the way down and you get lost, well, there's an easy way to see, hey, I actually got out of order there, reorder it, and it reorders in the document. So it's super helpful for that. It's helpful for finding, through the inspector, different keywords and things you've labeled in the document. You can create, draft status, so you know where things are at. There's all kinds of tools with it. So I use it mainly because I don't outline naturally. I don't pre-write naturally. And I find it incredibly helpful I find it incredibly helpful to have this system that actually structures the novel passively, because I find it, some of Brandon Sanderson's early novels, the kind of the outline shows, and you don't want the bones of the thing to be showing. But at the same time, you do need them. And anyone that doesn't do pre-writing and doesn't do structuring is just asking for a whole lot more work later. Let's screen share again. So what we're going to do here is actually, let's do something real quick. Let's see if I can pull this open. So I'm going to share. Let's see. Okay, so there's this author out there named Rachel Aaron Bach. I think that's Rachel Aaron, that my friend Emily Monroe, who was in the anthology of Gods and Globes. She's an author here in New York, and she's a curator, communications director at the Manhattan or Children's Museum of Manhattan. She pointed me on to this, and I was going to just mention this real quick before we get to the pre-writing. This, super pretentious title, but how I went from writing 2,000 words a day to 2,000 to 10,000. And it's really, really simple system. There's it's about 4,000 words on it. But I can pull up the key. Key bit here. Let's see. It's in the research, I think. Okay, there we go. Let's switch to Scrivener again. So she has this system. It's really simple, but even if you have your outline in general, but there is a benefit to pulling aside, a piece of paper and just taking a couple of notes of like what's going to happen in the scene, or what's going to happen today. I'm not going to do that as much today, but I will do that some on screen. A lot of people just they sit down, they start writing, and it's helpful both at the start to have kind of this outline of what you're going to write before you write it, and then also it's going to be helpful to have to end in the middle of a sentence, so that you know for sure, even if you don't have a decent outline for the day, for sure kind of where you're going to move forward. As far as time goes, tracking productivity and evaluate. I actually have an Excel document. I started keeping track of how many words I write, where I wrote them, what I was listening to, what I was doing. It is the reason that before I started, I've got oranges here, I've got my tea over there, so I don't leave this space, before I start going. So these are some environmental things. Switching positions helps me a lot. Actually, I've got this standing desk. It's a secretary. Let me show you what it looks like, because you always see the front side of it, but never the back side of it. So it's this, this standing secretary desk. So I'm actually propping my computer up on my bride's photo albums. Don't tell her. Shh. Let's see. So keeping track of that data has helped me figure out how to better get a word count in, and then enthusiasm, get excited about what you're writing, and that happens in the knowledge process, but writing towards a scene or a moment that is is something that you can really get behind, writing towards you know, if you're an action writer, like a specific fight scene or a specific moment of drama. I actually know what I'm writing towards today. There's a scene that we're writing towards that is going to be a brick falling on a character's head because of his brother. And that specific moment is something that actually happened to me. I was a terrible, terrible kid when it came to my relationship with my brother. And I actually, it's like one of the things I'm least proud of in my life. But we had been watching Home Alone 1 or 2, and I was in my father's shed, and I rigged up a brick about a story up, and I actually pushed it off when my brother walked under to make a booby trap, but the corner of it fell on here and hit his head and knocked him out, and he was bleeding, and it was terrible. Obviously it's a terrible, terrible thing to do to your brother. And so I'm actually taking that scene. I'm like, that scene I'm hijacking for the purposes of this story. And I'm going to like try to convey a lot of the emotion from that. And it's rare that I actually write that autobiographically. But I think it's important because I'm writing a story about brothers. If you're just joining us, I have a short story commission from Spark and Echo, and they gave me permission to live stream the process. And so, I'm doing this because it's very rare that a fiction writer is able to show kind of every step of the journey. And since I'm already getting paid for it, I figure there's no risk in showing that process, both for the sake of readers who are interested in that sort of thing and for the sake of other writers and creators. So we were just talking about kind of the pre-writing stuff, which is, from, let's see. Sorry, wrong screen. It is from this pretentious title blog, how she went from 2,000 words a day to 10,000 words a day. It was actually a super helpful system. So I am kind of hijacking some of that in my process of late, which involves kind of this 3-tier system. So knowing what you want to write before you write it, which is more than just pre-outlining, it's actually jotting down with a notepad to your side, which I have, kind of what you're going to work towards. Time, which is tracking productivity and evaluate. Man, that is really, really blurry. I don't know if there's a way to resize in Scrivener, probably. There we go. Hey. Track productivity and evaluate. So that's kind of like a literal, an Excel spreadsheet, keep track of the data, what you're doing, when you're doing it, and what the word count was, so that you can kind of fine tune that. And you don't have to, there's a great, I'm gonna kind of subvert myself here. There's a great, my friend John Babbitt, who I met, let's see. I met it when I was curating the Brooklyn Film Festival. He wrote a piece for McSweeney's called "I Will Not Write Unless I Am Swaddled in Furs," and I want to preface everything with this piece. One, because John is an amazing writer, and two, because it's really easy to get caught up in a lot of these things and forget that, like, you can write on the subway. In fact, I wrote a whole novella about the subway on the subway. It was kind of difficult to do, but you can write on an airplane. You can, like, you don't have to be restricted by these things. These things are tools to help you move towards kind of a more productive space. But I'll give you a sample of this real quick. I will not write unless I am swaddled in furs and am roosted to perfection upon the couch. Perhaps I could write upon the divan, but never a table. And there must be furs. I will not write unless I am oriented perpendicularly to a large window. I'm not picky, but it must be quite large, and there must be sheets of cold rain pouring down outside. If the rain stops, so do I. I will not write without a bracing rain. I must have fuzzy slippers. They must be slightly worn on the inside. Because of the fuzz, it's too fluffy. My feet become claustrophobic, and my writing naturally follows suit. They must not be too warm, though, or else it feels as if I'm merely wearing warm shoes with no socks, which makes me feel ill-prepared. They must be just fuzzy enough. the beverage is of utmost importance. It must be hot. He goes on and on and on. And you know, the guy says that, you know, he's only written twice in his life. He's heard splendid things about this Motel 6. You know, so all of that to say, you know, everything we're about to do is to encourage and push forward kind of that writing space, but it's not mandatory. So, so I would, you know, I would put a footnote on, you know, kind of her system here of moving from 2K to 10K is like, yeah, it's helpful to track productivity and evaluate, but efficiency, as Chesterton says, is kind of the slave of the present. It is not helpful for the future, and it really takes vision to move forward in the future. So I was, you know, that writer I was talking to this week, you know, I told him one of the most important things you can do is take a walk. I actually, when I get too far into my headspace and system, and having to have things a specific way, it's actually helpful to go out to Greenwood Cemetery or you know, whatever the green space is near you. I'm assuming a lot of you live more in rural environments where you have more trees than I do here, which I envy. You know, that sort of like non-productive time is just as important, and enthusiasm writing towards what we get. So without further ado, we're going to kind of move into, you know, kind of the start of this short story commission. You know, I'm assuming some of you, you know, I didn't really give anyone warning about this, so I'm assuming some of you are going to tune in later. So what this is actually, you know, I've got 3 different books here actually nested inside of Scrivener. Bellhammer's Captain Hook Incorporated, which is about a caper, and the Moon Boys. It's part of a trilogy called White Trash Magic. Bellhammer's, you know, if you go here, you can see the Moments of Misbelief. It's organized kind of like a symphony with these various epigraphs. And, you know, there's a couple of chapters. I think this is the one that one of these sold to the New Haven Review out of Yale, you know, another one to the Misty Review. So it's under consideration right now. I'm not really touching book 2. So we're actually going to be writing scenes from book 3 that will function as short stories. And hopefully at the end of the short story commission, it'll be a cohesive unit. If it's not, I can always delete it, write something completely different. But it's important when you start to have what Lisa Cron says are moments of misbelief. So in a second, I'm going to be talking about the Mace quotient, which Mary Robinette Kowal talks about a lot, principles of antagonism, which I wrote about in Writer's Digest. But all of those things, all of those systems, they're only helpful to an extent, you know, and I think this is what people get at or are hoping to get at when they talk about, you know, having a specific form, having, you know, rules or those sorts of things, creative limits, is they are helpful as a frame. You know, Chesterton said the most important part of the picture is the frame. And that says what is the painting and what is not the painting. So they're helpful towards that end, but they're not helpful if you don't have an actual character to insert into it. If all you have is the frame and no canvas, no paint, no, you know, I'm sure there's someone who's, you know, made some sort of art installation that subverted the whole thing, but you can only do that once, right? There's only like one empty frame you can do. After that, you know, it's just kind of the exception that proves the rule. So all of these systems I'm going to show you are only helpful towards the end of you actually have specific characters that you have in mind. And so Lisa Cron talks about moments of misbelief. She's acquaintance, colleague, you know, I would call her a friend. She probably didn't know me from Adam, but she taught a couple of times up at the Writer Unboxed conference out of Boston, out of Salem, Massachusetts, that Therese Walsh of Writer Unboxed leads. And Lisa, she insists that, you know, got Story Down There by Robert McKee and some others, that these abstractions are not helpful at all. And she says, you know, abstracting about the outline of story is completely pointless, about who's, principles of antagonism, or about the Mace quotient, or about movement of a story. These things are not helpful in her mind, because it only is relevant to specific details. And I agree with what she's getting at, which is stories are about incarnating ideas. So if it's not a specific person living out these specific things, or a specific house, a specific, profession, these sorts of specific manifestations in a character's life, then it's not a story. But they are helpful to those of us that think in terms of big ideas, to order those things that we're going to manifest. So I would push back on her some, but what she is getting at is true, which is, if you don't have a root moment, kind of the psychotherapists talk about it in terms of trauma. Aristotle talked about it in terms of fatal flaw or moment of misbelief, or, some sort of internal thing that ought change about the character. Catholics would talk about mea culpa and, confession, repentance, those sorts of things. She talks about it in terms of trauma, in terms of that primal wound in our psychology. If you don't have something like that, you're not going to be able to move the story forward. And she says this, it's true in some degree. She says this, because in her mind, all story is backstory. All story is, it's rooted in what has happened before. It's that phrase, the past. I don't remember what it was. The past hasn't changed. It's not even past. You're not over the past. It's not even past. Butchering it. But she says that because everything that happens, every decision a character makes, is actually rooted in who they were and who they're becoming. So, if the classic example in McGee, which she doesn't like McGee, but great examples in McGee, is Chinatown, where, I think it's Jack Nicholson is trying to figure out the backstory of this lady who's being held up by this baron that's abusing her and these sorts of things. And he's slapping her in the climax, trying to get the information out of her. Who is she? Who is she? And he's referring to this little girl that's been with this woman the whole time. And she's like, he slaps her and she's like, she's my sister. And he slaps her. She's my daughter. She's my sister. She's my daughter. And then she says, she's my sister and my daughter. And then you realize what this man has been doing to his daughter, to Syra, granddaughter. You have to write that first in order to motivate that ask and answer of who is this little girl, that whole film. You can't just write the script and think, oh man, maybe we should make this really traumatic event. That changes the decision of, I think it's Nicholson's character and also this lady's trying to help. And so those moments of misbelief, those are huge in moving forward in all of these systems. So I'm trying to tuck my hair in. Whether it's the Mace quotient, or whether it's the principles of antagonism, or whether it's any of those frameworks. So what ends up happening? Let's get practical here. Is I find it super, super helpful to, it's swaddled in furs, we don't want that, to go in and write moments of misbelief that have happened to these characters. So in the short story commission that I'm getting ready to do, it is going to be about two brothers that have kind of these texting conversations. One of them is kind of imprisoned, enslaved on on the Earth. The other one is off having sort of a space opera adventure, right? And one of them is kind of caught up in slavery of worrying about his safety. The other one is caught up trying to run from who he was and that'll kind of motivate what he's doing. So when we talk about the moments of misbelief here, we're going to move to Hayden. So the first thing I'm going to write, and it's two boys, they're not the same age. Just a little bit of the seed of the idea is rooted in kind of what I talked about that moment earlier. Let's see if it is. This moment I had where I dropped a brick on my brother's head. I'm taking that little seed bit and moving into this story. So I'm going to go ahead and just write towards it for a little bit, and then I'll explain kind of what I'm doing. Yeah. And so these are just, just kind of free flowing, and we'll see where we go from here. I'm going to turn on, I think it's okay to turn on a little music as I work here. Okay, so here's something. Here's something I want to point out about Scrivener. A lot of times, I like to, when I'm really investing in a character, I like to dig into behindthename.com, which is about the meaning of last names, first names. It's it's a way to endow kind of thematic content deep into the narrative without doing a whole lot of extra work, because every time that character's name gets mentioned, they get brought up again. So J.K. Rowling's great at this. Dickens does this. Other people have done this. But Stephen King does it, but he does it kind of ham-fistedly sometimes. But sometimes you have a character that you come across like this that you don't you just don't really care, you know, who they are or why or anything. And so you just kind of need a placeholder. Scrivener is great for that. And I'm going to show you why. There's this tool up here in writing tools called the name generator. And you can go over here and change all kinds of settings, male, female, either. In this case, I'm looking for male. You can attempt alliteration, double-barreled surnames. You know, you can change where they're from, and you know how obscure you want the names. In this case, I don't know that I want that obscure of a name. Excuse me. You know, number of forenames and so on. And you just hit generate, and so here's like alliteration and double-barreled surnames. So I'm going to take that off. That first name was the name of my cousin back there. That was wild. Okay, yeah. So let's take off alliteration because I don't want a superhero. Go pull brawl. That's a terrible name. Oh my gosh. Go pull brawl. Sergio. I like this, all right. That's got kind of the feel I'm looking for. Now you're like, really, all that for Danny? Well, you know, Danny wasn't on the mind, and other names were that weren't helpful. So if that gets you moving, then yeah, do all that for Danny. Make sure we're sharing the right screen here. All right. And this is all just like backstory. This is all just like working towards a traumatic event. Not all of this is going to get used, but this is helpful. I normally don't do this for a short story, but since we're doing 4 of them and we're kind of camping out with these characters, I want to know these guys. So busting open an orange here. So it takes kind of a free writing process just to like move through that. So we're just gonna go for a little bit. Okay. Oh, sorry. I need to move back. Back leg's not going to help us. So one of the things I'm trying to work towards here is not just having a moment of misbelief, but actually having a root start. Like it's not just having a moment of misbelief that matters. It's not just having kind of these events that define the change that needs to happen in the character. It's actually really important to have kind of a momentum forward towards what they're changing. So, a story isn't about what happens. A story is about it's about what happens means, or how what happened changes us. So really doesn't matter if a character gets what they want or not. It is the goal gives us focus. What they want to achieve gives us focus for their momentum forward. I had a debate with a Native American writer about this. She was, I was editing something for her, lovely person. And I think a talented writer with potential, but she disagreed. She said not all stories have conflict, not all stories have goals. And so I gently started pointing her to some Cherokee myths and some Blackfoot myths and some myths that are key texts in peoples that existed on this land before any of us. And it's, it doesn't manifest itself always in the same ways, but a character always has something that they want, and they always change as a result of that desire. Sometimes it's pleasure, sometimes it's power, sometimes it's honor, sometimes it's money, sometimes it's virtue, sometimes it's the grounds of all existence. It's a true desire. It's an ultimate desire, as as some Catholic bishops might say, as opposed to a proximate desire, even a tertiary desire. But it is those desires that motivate us and change us. The story is first and foremost about desire. It's about how what we want changes us for better or evil, for good or evil, better or worse. That's the phrase I was looking for. So the moments of misbelief kind of define in a way what needs changed. And we talk about change, we don't first and foremost mean physical change, whether or not they die, whether or not they lose a limb, whether or not they get pregnant, whether or not they move through the pregnancy and have a baby. It's not just physical change, and it's mental change first and foremost, because you change your mind and everything else changes. That Greek word metanoia, to the above things of the nous of the mind, like to have those things change. So the trauma kind of defines why they want what they want. It's the internal conflict that motivates the external conflict. It is something has happened to them. Sometimes it's trauma, sometimes it's they themselves have traumatized someone else. Sometimes they get abused, sometimes they abuse. We all do both all the time. We are always being hurt and hurting people, and we need to heal through those things and change both. And so these moments kind of, they inform us. They inform like what we're doing, why we're doing it. And yeah, I think I've drilled that a million times, but I'm going to switch over to the screen here to kind of give you an example of what I'm going at. So we're writing this moment of misbelief, but what we're working towards are two pieces here. One is principles of antagonism, and one is the Mace quotient. So, so kind of the main, there's an issue plot kind of happening with Hayden about abuse and safety. He ends up being a carpenter by the end of the story. I have some mannerisms and stuff like that, but we're getting towards this internal conflict of abuse versus safety. Kind of this idea of he wants green pastures, still waters, a world without anxiety. There's this fear versus self-loathing thing happening, where he wants the actual American dream, where he can have a house and kid and a wife, but everything and everyone is abusing him as he pursues that. So, and I think some of that's rooted. All of that's actually rooted in this story and a couple other backstories we're going to write, which is, what happened to him to want safety so much. Well, in this case, it's he thought he could just play with his brother, and he also thought he could just kind of mess around with these kind of magical cantrips, but they actually tend to be pretty dangerous. To the principles of antagonism that I'm going to be using, I'm going to switch over to Chrome here in just a second. Let's see. Okay, so from a Writer's Digest. Oh, I need to bring you guys along. Let's see here. Wrote a piece not too long ago. If you just search outline for pantsers on Writer's Digest, you'll find it. But, I talk about how character is about the true inner truth and the virtues and vices within a person. Like I said, the goal drives the main character. Only in a farce will a character want something insignificant, such as the classic example of the farce is Harold and Kumar go to White Castle. It's like, what do you want to do with your life? I want to go to White Castle. That's a farce. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a person that went to White Castle. That's a farce. Because who really cares about whether they succeed or not? What I'm moving towards is this kind of principles and antagonism thing, which I've talked about before to some of you. I think, it frames up what we're getting ready to do better than just about anything. It's in McGee's story. And I really think it's one of the most underused outlining systems, because people don't actually think of it like an outline. But it really is, because a story is not about having an antagonist. A story is not about having a villain. A story is about having principled opposition to the thing the main character wants. And the types and forms of that opposition end up shifting that goal over time, which ultimately shifts the thing behind the goal, which is this moment of misbelief we're writing. So it's really, really, really important. So for instance, so you have, a protagonist who meets, let's see if we can expand this a little bit. There we go. That'll help. Oh, no, don't do that. We've got the irritant, the assailant, and the recreant are the names that I give them. And so the irritant kind of is someone who provides a little bit of contrast at the start of the story. Assailant is someone who directly opposes and obviously opposes the protagonist. The recreant is someone that looks like they're trying to help, but actually internally is not. So basically you're moving from someone who, so you have the protagonist, who is someone that both externally and internally wants a thing, or maybe they don't even want it yet. Maybe they just want to want it, and they're trying to change into the kind of person that would want it. The irritant is a person in their life, and this can, by the way, these all three can be the same person. A villain can get worse, even as they appear to be better. Yeah, there are examples of that. But an irritant is someone who looks externally like they want something different, but internally they want the same thing as the protagonist. The assailant is someone who both externally and internally want the opposite of what the protagonist wants. The recreant is someone that looks like they want what the protagonist wants, but actually on the inside they want the opposite. And so it is essentially a way of moving the protagonist from completely exterior desires to completely interior desires, where the seed of change happens. It's a way of moving from just externals that that are like, oh, the story is about fighting robots. Well, actually, the story is about these deep, deep internal things that are going on under the surface. It's always moving from the body towards the spirit, body towards the mind, the fighting robots towards, the character's backstory. And it's all about backstory. And so as we move towards backstory, we have to have backstory to write towards, which is kind of what we're doing. But to give you an example of this, so if your character wants orthodoxy, like Alyosha in the Brothers Karamazov, the irritant will practice nonconformity, kind of like Saint Francis. So if you're talking about like a Thomas More type on nonconformity, actually he's a bad example because he was nonconformist. More like a Thomas Aquinas type, or a Saint Dominic is actually a better example. Very structured orthodoxy. Irritant will practice nonconformity like Saint Francis, who is, he shows up with these wild, wild groups in the midst of the Dominican monks, just like a circus. Saint Francis shows up. That's kind of irritating because externally that looks like he doesn't want the same thing that Saint Dominic wants. So there's this external, shift. Internally, they both want the same thing. They're both after orthodoxy, and that's why the church canonized both of them, because they're both after the same thing. But it was irritating to Dominic. Assailant is a direct attack. It's a direct persecution. Like Severus Snape and not Severus Snape. It's a bad example. More like Draco Malfoy in every Harry Potter book. Recreant is someone kind of like Cypher in the Matrix that looks good but actually is bad. Kind of betrayer type. And it's funny, you can write a story in which from two characters' perspectives, they actually betray one another, to where they are both protagonists of their own story. Certainly that's happened in history, and it will happen again. So character seeking justice encounters an irritant seeking indifference, injustice, tyranny. So in other words, it's a way to show these contrasts internally and externally. Orthodoxy and heresy, justice and tyranny, greed and philanthropy are actually fascinating. I think greed and generosity as polar opposites. But that's all on Writer's Digest if you want it. But that's kind of one of the things we're writing towards is, let's see here. Is kind of that moment of misbelief for that. I'm going to have to wrap up here in about 10 minutes, but I'm going to see if I can get some more canon so that we can get towards, hopefully, this antagonistic outline.
Sister, I remember, Father, give that me what you could. Never land where we thought you would. Or anywhere close to it. Who would have thought you never would? So tell me what happened when the waves break and you're surrounded. He tries to kill you, and you allow it. Just to let me live, more light I'll ever be. Watch the light forever. What is my life in imitation living? The smell of blood that I see. Was that your way I've proven? We look the same for running. Tell me what happened when the waves break and you're surrounded. He tries to kill you, and you allow it. And you allow it. Help, help, I'm drowning in the sea where I found you. The kerosene in your skin, the chemistry that I'm bound to. I picture you in slow motion somewhere in West Colorado. I don't know where that place is. If I did, I would follow. I don't know what this taste is. If I did, I would swallow. I knew all the answers that I allowed to keep. Like that I've been. What's more than I can speak? All I drew out the answers that I felt to see. Turns out that I need much more than you.
All right. So I'm gonna have to quit, but we're gonna keep doing this every so often as I, complete this short story commissioning assignment. I've got other things I'm working on, but I, since that is something, kind of this unique opportunity to show something I'm already getting paid for in the whole process. I want to try it. I might get into it and find it's slowing me down a whole bunch, but I think it's worthwhile for the handful of you that have asked about these sorts of things before. And we'll hopefully have an archive when we're done of kind of start to finish, the whole process. So appreciate you guys hanging out, and I will talk at you soon. Oh, maybe if you haven't yet, jump on over to Spotify and check out All Who Wonder. It's an album I just put out. I don't normally do music, but it's got songs like this on it.
Mississippi, 61, they watched his daddy die.
Just Cherokee Highway. It's on All Who Wonder on Spotify, on Apple Music, and elsewhere. You can check that out. It's actually a series of songs from characters in this world we're touching, so might be worth your time. I will see you guys later on.